It's totally fun. I have a lot more stories.
That you do.
Yeah.
That you do.
Guilty as charged with the stories.
Hey everybody, welcome once again to this edition of I've Got Something to Say. This is the podcast, my podcast, where I tell stories about my life and you come along for the ride. Thanks for joining me. This week's edition is called Public Displays of Self-Abuse. I think I've established already on this podcast that my children, Molly and Abby, are both Chinese and were adopted from China. If you're new to the podcast and didn't know that, there's a little fun fact for you. My two daughters, now 19 and 17, were both adopted. And the road to adoption was an interesting one, to say the least. I could not be happier with where I am now and with the kids that I have now. They're both amazing, doing amazing things. Molly's just finished her freshman year at Mizzou and was the director of human resources for her sorority in the second semester of her freshman year, which is unusual for a freshman to have that. And then Abby, I just finished watching her playing a summer league basketball game, and the kid's just lights out with her three-pointers, a hot shot on defense, and I just couldn't be more pleased. The path to get those children, however, wasn't easy, and that's okay because the rewards have definitely made it worth it. But I will tell you, of all the hard things I've gone through in my life, and there have been some, I'm not going to sit here and ask you to cry me a river about what I've been through, but, you know, losing a best friend at 20 years old and losing my father in my early 30s and losing another one of my best friends at 40 years old, all of those things have been really hard, but the hardest thing, or right up there with all of that, is going through infertility. If you have a choice of either listening to accordion music while chewing on thumbtacks for time and all eternity, or going through infertility, I suggest that you become a big fan of Judy Tenuta and just strap it in for the long haul, because it's much better than going through infertility. And there's so many facets to it. There's the emotional, the emotional depths that you go through when you think you're pregnant but you're not, and you're trying again for another month and it doesn't work out. There's the total lack of any romance that happens in your love life once you have to plan everything out and say, okay, we're going to give you a shot here, we're going to take your temperature here, when it hits this certain temperature, we got to go. And then there's just the general humiliation of what you go through physically when you're getting tested and finding out, why are you infertile and what can we do to help that out? And it's just no fun. So I want to just talk briefly, if I may, and I can, it's my podcast, about one of those things that happened for me. So as I said, when you go through the physical side of this, they're looking at, what is it that is causing this? So they have to do a number of tests. That's the reason that at 30 years old, I got my prostate checked, when most people don't get it done until they're 40 or 45. But we needed to check everything out. They also determined that they needed to get a sperm count from me. Yeah, so that makes sense. Maybe I don't have the swimmers. I don't know. So the doctor's office said, okay, you can either produce a sample at home and bring it into the office with you, or you can come into our office and you can produce the sample here. Well, I chose to come into the office and produce the sample there. I was worried about transport, and you don't want to get pulled over with an open container, God forbid, with that in it. So I said, no, I'll come into your office. We'll take care of it there. So I went into the office, and I don't know what I was expecting. No, I take that back. I know exactly what I was expecting. What I was expecting is that they would have an area, maybe a private room, that would be dedicated to the production of said samples. And what I envisioned in my mind was maybe some soft bonded leather furniture, low lights, music, maybe some incense, lava lamp, some kind of visual aids. perhaps. Maybe an assistant, maybe the equivalent of like a doula or a midwife, but to help produce the goods that I needed to produce. So when I went in, what I figured is they would, walk me back to a room. I would hear "Let's Get It On" playing softly over the speakers. I'd do what I do, and then I'd be on my way, and everybody would be happy. What happened was a little bit different. I went in and said, "Hey, I'm here. I need to produce a sample." And they said, "Oh, okay." And they gave me a little plastic cup. And they said, "Okay, what you're going to want to do is go back out this door that you came into, take a left in the hallway, and then the men's restroom is right down the hall." And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going into the public bathroom." And she's like, "Yeah, that's the only space we have where you can do this." So I was a little just puzzled. We'll say I was puzzled. Like, okay, well, obviously it's going to be like a Starbucks bathroom where it's just got, one seat. You go in, you lock the door, you do your thing. Because I'm in a public medical building that has a bunch of doctors' offices. I walk out in the hallway, I go down, I find the men's room, I push the door open. There's no lock on this door. There are 2 urinals and 2 stalls, and I think a sink or 2 as well. So I survey the area. I'm like, well, geesh, okay, I'm going to have to go into a stall. The urinal's not going to work, and people might want to wash their hands in the sink, so that would be uncomfortable for everyone. But there were a couple of worries for me. One, like, what if somebody walks in while I am in this bathroom stall and they interrupt my flow? I'm getting into the mood, getting into the moment, doing what I do, and then they come in, and then I feel like, I would need to stop. Okay. So there's this pressure, like, you got to get it done. You got to get it done now because somebody might walk in. And then, this was quite a few years after, but not long enough after the George Michael incident where he got caught in a public bathroom, where I know you can get in trouble for doing this type of thing in a public bathroom. So I did have a cup from the doctor's office, which I thought I could show a police officer if they came by, just to say, hey, I'm legit. All right. I'm not, one-hand Randy here just having a good time. I'm here for a specific reason. So I'm in there and I'm kind of freaking out. Do I stand? Do I sit? How much time do I take? So many thoughts going through my head. And then it's like, sometimes a guy needs a little help getting this stuff done. Not always, but typically there's, visual aids or a fantasy of some kind or, whatever. So I'm sitting here in a well-lit public bathroom on the toilet with the stall door locked, looking at how wide the space is between the door and the actual frame, because are people going to be able to see in? I'm like, okay, I need a little help to get this going here. So I'm looking around for something. This was before smartphones, so I had no help from a smartphone. The ceiling tiles offered nothing. Cool texture, but not a lot of help for me. I look on the walls of the stall, and there's just the typical limericks that, here I sit all brokenhearted. Well, that's not going to do it for me. So finally, I'm like, you know what? There's a time to play and there's a time to work, and this is a time to work. So I just bore down, and I ended up just staring at the drain in the floor, because at least that was a hole. And I got the job done. Turns out the sperm count was fine, but we still went down the road of adoption. And again, if my daughters are listening, which, God, I hope they're not, could not be happier to have those 2 girls. And it was worth it going through all that, because I love you so much. And that does it for this edition of I've Got Something to Say. Hey, thank you so much for listening. Really appreciate you all tuning in. The loyal listeners who listen every week, and the one-time listeners who listen once and say, good God, what did I do? Thanks to all of you. And big thanks to the good folks at KCTK Radio, my old buddy Paul, for making this whole podcast happen. Really appreciate it. We'll talk to you next time.